Horikita's class has a traitor, and it's none other than Matsushita. And I am not speculating here, I am more or less 100% sure. So in this video, I'll explain why it makes sense for the traitor to be her, and I'll show you the undeniable proof that the traitor of class A is indeed Matsushita. But before we go directly to the nail in the coffin, let's have an overlook on this traitor situation. In Year 3 Volume 1, Ainakoji approaches Kushida with the proposal of being the traitor of Class A. Kushida didn't give any answers and instead asked for some time to think it over. Moving from that, there was no confirmation of Kushida's answer. After that, we get confirmation in Year 3 Volume 2 of a traitor existing in Class A. How? Because Ainakoji knew what Chabashira sensei had said to the students after the declaration of the ruleless exam, and he himself mentioned it to Hashimoto. Now that we have the timeline of the traitor situation, let's look at why it's Matsushita and why it makes sense for her to be the traitor. I remember when the traitor situation was first mentioned, my immediate thought was it most likely is going to be Matsushita, because apart from people who are really dedicated to the class, the likes of Hirata, Sudo, Kei, etc., she alone is the one who is intelligent and not too dedicated to Horikita's class. And this matters because when you select a traitor, you would select someone capable, not the likes of Hondo or Ike, because they are first of all stupid and mainly non-observant. So you would want someone who's capable enough to hide themselves and also notice many subtle things in the class. For example, maybe the exact wording of Chabashira sensei's hint in Year 3 Volume 2? We know that after the exam was suddenly announced, Ainakoji probably sought a conversation with the traitor and most likely asked them for the exact words of Chabashira sensei to confirm his hypothesis about the exam being the daily behavior check. And the traitor knew exactly what Chabashira sensei had said, which mean one of the two things. Either when Ainakoji asked the traitor, they were able to remember exactly what Chabashira sensei had said, word for word, which at the moment must have seemed unimportant, meaning the traitor has a good memory, or they immediately started recording as soon as Chabashira sensei mentioned the exam, which is also impressive because the announcement couldn't have taken more than a minute or two, and considering the element of surprise as well, the immediate thoughtfulness to do that is impressive. So now that we know that, it becomes easy to narrow down the traitor of Class A. For starters, the traitor needs to be smart and observant, not too dedicated to Horikita's class, and values Ainakoji highly enough to betray while being in Class A. Now the first point itself eliminates a lot, and I mean a lot, of students. Then when I say not too dedicated, I mean the ones who will never betray Horikita for Ainakoji, such as Sudo, Hirata, Kei, etc. So removing them and including the last point, we are only left with 3 people, Koinji, Kushida and Matsushita. And Koinji wouldn't betray Class A unless he gets a lot of private points, like in the millions, and you would need to give them to him every time you need info, which is very inefficient for a traitor. Not to mention, we know from Year 3 Volume 1 and 2 that Ainakoji was low on private points, so that option is impossible. Now then, we are left with Kushida and Matsushita, and honestly, it looked like any one of them could be the traitor, and that was what I was thinking, like maybe it's Matsushita or maybe it's Kushida. I couldn't be 100% sure. That is until Year 3 Volume 3. Matsushita was the commander in this volume, and this is where everything falls into place. In Chapter 6 Part 5, Ainakoji asks the position of Class A at around 5:25 pm. Then, 10 minutes later, around the 5:35 pm update, he instructs Takemoto to ask Shimazaki to disable his GPS at the next update. This means at 5:40 pm, Ainakoji's GPS signal was effectively frozen. Now for those who might have forgotten the mechanics, disabling the GPS doesn't make the dot disappear. It makes it stop updating. It freezes at the last known location. So from 5:40 pm onwards, for every 5-minute update, that dot remained exactly in the same spot. And coincidentally, or perhaps not so coincidentally, this 5:40 pm mark is exactly when Horikita tells the class to relax, letting their guard down because they assume the danger had passed. We know that from Part 6, where all 8 were observed moving back towards H10 at 5:25 pm, and 15 minutes later at 5:40, she tells everyone that they can rest here for the night. This gives us a 15-minute update window. the 5:45 PM update, the 5:50 PM update, and the 5:55 PM update. In all these updates, Ainakoji's dot was absolutely still while he physically moved to attack Class A just before 6 PM. Now look at this from Matsushita's perspective as the commander. We know from the text that Ainakoji's group of 8 didn't return together. Moriyama, one of the students in the group, explicitly said, "Leave the return trip to me, I'll make sure everyone gets back safe," meaning they separated at that point. So on Matsushita's tablet, she wouldn't see a cluster of 8 signals mixed together. She would see 7 signals moving back towards the Class C and D base and 1 signal that was completely frozen. She saw this at 5:45, she saw it again at 5:50, and again at 5:55, and yet she did not warn Horikita. Not a single word. Now you could try to argue, well, Horikita told everyone to relax, maybe Matsushita just stopped paying attention. I don't buy that for a second. Matsushita isn't EK or Hondo. We established earlier that she is smart, observant, and intellectually capable. Even if the class is relaxing, a commander's job is to watch the screen. If you see 7 dots moving and 1 dot that has completely stopped functioning for 15 minutes, which would be very clearly visible to you even if you are not paying attention, that is an anomaly, and a really big one at that. If she was truly loyal to Class A, she would have reported it immediately. She would have said, "Hey, 7 are coming back, but 1 person has stopped moving. That's suspicious." There is not a single reason for her to not report that, unless she was, the traitor. So if we assume that she is not a traitor, then she should have reported it, right? But she didn't. Why? Because she realized who that dot was. You see, Matsushita holds Ainakoji in high regard, so when she saw that lone frozen signal while the others moved away, she likely deduced 2 things. That it was Ainakoji acting alone and that he was plotting something and was counting on her silence. The second point here is important because this brings me to Ainakoji's perspective. Think about his plan. He didn't attack until right before 6 PM. 5:57 PM to be precise, and if Class A had been warned in advance, the likes of Sudo and Hirata would have put up a defense, and Ainakoji wouldn't have been able to inflict the damage he wanted or figure out the VIPs. Ainakoji is not a gambler. He doesn't rely on luck. He doesn't make plans hoping that the enemy commander just happens to be lazy or negligent. He makes plans based on certainty. And what even was his plan here if we assume that Matsushita is not a traitor? To go towards Class A while his GPS signal was frozen for the next 3 updates and hope that the commander wouldn't notice at all? Because that is a really flawed plan. Anybody would have noticed it. And this got me thinking, what if Ainakoji asked all 7 of the other students to stay in the same area so that his signal being frozen wouldn't get noticed? But that's even more suspicious if all 8 stopped. So the only likely possibility would be if he asked them to stop but still move around a bit so that it comes off as them still moving. But even this is suspicious enough behavior that would normally get reported. Like, even if they couldn't figure out one GPS was frozen, something like, "Hey, all 8 students were heading back until the previous updates, but now they stopped and are hanging around the same area for some reason." And this info would be enough for Class A to be on their guard, as Horikita could easily assume it could be a tactic to hide a frozen GPS signal. So the plan doesn't make sense in either scenario, of which the most likely is that the other students just left towards the base as Ainakoji separated. So why did he go through with this plan? Because he knew he wouldn't be reported, and the only way he can be that 100% sure that his frozen GPS signal wouldn't trigger an alarm is if he knew that the person watching the screen would cover for him, which means he counted on Matsushita's intelligence that she would realize what he was doing and that her being the traitor, she would keep her mouth shut. There's also one more thing the author left us with. In chapter 7, it's mentioned that Class A only used the identification tactic, the one that identifies a specific student's GPS signal, on Morufuji Rika from Ryuen's class. And later it's mentioned that Horikita believed they didn't need to use it for anyone else. But why include that specific detail right before the end? It just feels like there was no need to add that info at all. Granted, it could be just there for the sake of it and not have any deeper meaning, but what I mean is, it's entirely possible that Matsushita used the identification tactic earlier because no one else except her would get to know that. So perhaps when Ainakoji went to area I-10 alone previously, or right when that dot froze, she used it just to confirm her suspicion that it was indeed Ainakoji. She knows that if anyone from class A was moving solo in a dangerous exam, it has to be him. And when she realized that he was counting on her to not report, maybe she just used that tactic to be sure of it. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter if she did that or not, because she would realize either way that it was Ainakoji, or at least it was someone sent by Ainakoji. So she really would have no reason to report the freezing of the signal if she was the traitor that Ainakoji chose. So when you put it all together, the conclusion is undeniable. A smart student who can notice anomalies, not to mention a simple one like this, just stays silent and gives no information at all, and a mastermind who executes a plan that relies entirely on that silence. This whole situation only makes sense when Matsushita is the traitor. Now, if you still have doubts, let me show you Matsushita's perspective one more time. 3 updates, 1 GPS signal frozen out of the 8 students, and no warning whatsoever. In normal circumstances, it doesn't make sense unless the traitor is Matsushita, and honestly, I think Horikita is going to figure this out in the next volume itself. Maybe because of the same reasoning that I just shared with you, which brings me to my next theory, which I'll share in another video, so make sure you subscribe for that and like the video because that helps and motivates me to keep making more Classroom of the Elite content. With that said, if there's anything you'd like to add to this theory, or if there's some contradiction you have noticed, I'd be happy to discuss that in the comment section, or you can also join my Discord with the link in description. So have a nice day ahead, and I'll see you in the next one.